Imagine losing everything: your family, your hope, your will to carry on. Now, imagine a street dog, abandoned and forgotten, becomes the one thread that can pull you back from the brink. This is a story about loss, redemption, and the kind of love that doesn't need words to be felt. A man, a dog, and a daughter who was believed to be gone forever. A bond that will change everything they knew about survival. Sometimes the greatest gifts come in the most unexpected forms. Are you ready to discover how? Every morning, just after the sun cast its first sleepy glow over the cracked pavement and rusted rooftops, Ravi made his quiet walk to the corner tea stall. He wasn't there for chai or small talk. Those were luxuries he could no longer afford. His visits had a purpose, a simple, unspoken ritual. Ravi came to feed a street dog, a scrawny, mud-streaked creature he had named Bhola. Wasn't pretty. His fur was matted, one ear was torn, and he walked with a slight limp. But to Ravi, Bhola was more than just a stray. The dog had first appeared outside his apartment building on a night when the rain fell so hard it felt like punishment from the sky. Ravi had opened his creaky gate and found the animal curled up in a puddle, shivering, eyes dull with hunger. He had tossed a piece of leftover chapati near him. Bhola had gobbled it up without hesitation, wagging his tail with weak enthusiasm. That night, Ravi gave him shelter under a broken bench and covered him with a torn sack. The next morning, the dog was still there, waiting, and every morning since then he returned. Ravi had little to give. Once, he had been a factory supervisor with a small family, a small home, and dreams not too big for his modest life. But those dreams had come crashing down the day his wife died in a car accident. Their daughter, just 5 at the time, had also been in the car. The police had told him she didn't survive either. The grief hollowed him out. He missed work, lost his job, and spiraled into a cycle of despair. Debts piled up, furniture was sold, friends faded. Eventually, he found work as a night security, guard in a warehouse far across the city. The pay was minimal, the hours grueling, but it was all he had. In the midst of that gray, empty routine, Bhola became his one point of light. Ravi never spoke much to the dog, and Bhola never demanded anything. There were no tricks, no playing fetch, just quiet companionship. Some mornings, Ravi would sit beside Bhola on the curb after feeding him, resting his hand on the dog's back. As they both stared at the slow, waking city, Bhola always looked at him with those patient, knowing eyes, the kind that didn't pity, didn't ask, didn't judge, just understood. It was a bond built not from need but from recognition, one broken soul seeing another. Bhola may have been a street dog, but to Ravi, he was a thread that kept him tethered to life, a reminder that even in the wreckage, something still waited for him every morning. And so, day after day, Ravi brought what he could: a few biscuits, a piece of bread, some rice wrapped in old newspaper, and Bhola, loyal as sunrise, would be there, tail wagging slowly, like a heartbeat that refused to give up. The monsoon arrived with no warning that year, sweeping across the city like a long-held breath finally released. The sky turned an angry charcoal gray, and the wind howled through the narrow lanes like a ghost looking for something it had lost. For days, the rain came down in thick sheets, soaking everything: homes, hopes, and forgotten corners. Ravi hated the rain. It reminded him of the night he lost everything, that cursed, wet evening when the phone rang, and the world as he knew it unraveled in a matter of minutes. Since then, the sound of thunder felt like a wound reopening. The smell of damp earth only deepened the ache in his chest. Still, every morning, soaked or not, he went out with whatever food he could gather. Bhola was always there, curled near the tea stall's blue tarpaulin roof, shivering but waiting. Ravi would kneel, unwrap a packet of biscuits or hand over a bit of stale roti, and they would sit together for a few minutes, silent amid the dripping, chaos around them. But on the fifth day of the storm, Bola didn't come. Ravi waited under the tea stall's awning, sheltering from the downpour, clutching a small pouch of rice he had warmed on his portable stove. He looked down both ends of the street. The dog was nowhere. "Maybe he's just hiding somewhere dry," the tea vendor offered, pouring another cup of chai for a drenched customer. "These dogs are clever. They know where to go." But Ravi wasn't so sure. Bola was clever, yes, but loyal too. He'd come every single morning, even limping, even bleeding once after a fight. Rain had never stopped him before. He waited half an hour longer, standing in his soaked shirt and worn-out shoes. Then, reluctantly, he walked away, leaving the food behind in a dry spot near the bench, hoping Bola would find it. The next morning, he returned. No Bola, and again the day after that. Still no sign. Ravi's steps grew heavier with each passing day. A strange emptiness followed him now, like the silence after a song you didn't know you loved. He kept feeding the same spot, though. Leftovers wrapped in old newspaper, placed carefully on the dry patch under the awning. But the food remained untouched. The rain finally stopped on the seventh day, leaving puddles like forgotten tears in the street. The air smelled of wet dust and something fading. Ravi searched nearby alleys, called out in hushed tones, even asked a few local shopkeepers if they had seen the dog. Nothing. He told himself Bola had probably just found a better spot, a kinder, stranger, or perhaps moved on, as street dogs often did. But deep down, Ravi feared something worse. Something permanent. The loss sat in his chest like a stone. He hadn't realized how much the dog meant to him until he stopped coming. How the quiet presence, the shared silences, had stitched some warmth back into the fabric of his life. Now, even that small light was gone. 10 days had passed since the storm. Every morning, Ravi stood at the corner where he and Bola had shared countless quiet moments, staring at the empty street as if willing the dog to return. But each day, there was nothing. The usual bustle of the city carried on, indifferent, to his growing sense of loss. He didn't know why it affected him so deeply. After all, Bola was just a street dog. But there had been something in the dog's eyes, something that made him feel less alone in a world that seemed to have turned its back on him. It was just before dawn on the 10th day when he heard it. The soft, scraping sound of paws against the wet ground. Ravi's heart skipped, but he quickly shook the thought away. No, it couldn't be. Not after all this time. But then, there he was. Bola. The dog staggered into view, soaked to the bone, his fur matted and limp. His thin body quivered with exhaustion, and he walked with a pronounced limp, as though he'd traveled far and endured more than any stray should have to. Ravi's breath caught in his throat as he bent down instinctively, his eyes filling with concern. "Bola," he murmured, kneeling beside the dog, reaching out to touch the animal's trembling head. But Bola didn't seem to want the comfort. He merely let out a low, weak bark and dropped something at Ravi's feet. A dirty, rolled-up cloth. Ravi blinked in confusion. He stared at the bundle for a moment before carefully unwrapping it. The cloth was damp, almost heavy with moisture, and it gave off a faint, unpleasant smell. Inside, a child's torn t-shirt lay, worn at the edges and stained in places Ravi couldn't identify. Beneath it, tucked carefully, was a small, waterlogged wallet. Ravi hesitated for a moment before lifting it up, his fingers trembling as he opened it. Inside were 3 old photographs, each one frayed with age. The first 2 were unremarkable, a faded picture of a family at a park, and another of a woman, holding a child's hand, a quiet, happy moment frozen in time. Ravi's eyes skimmed them briefly, but his heart had already begun to race. He turned to the third photo, his breath caught in his throat. There, staring back at him from the photograph, was a young girl. Her dark hair was tied into a neat ponytail, her eyes bright with life, but it wasn't just any child. It was Mira, his daughter. He blinked rapidly, unable to process what he was seeing. The picture was taken just weeks before the accident. He knew that smile, the shape of her face. He'd seen it in 1,000 moments, 1,000 memories. But to see it now, after all these years, felt like a punch to the gut. How could this be? Mira had died, along with his wife, in that crash. The police had confirmed it. He had buried the pain deep within himself and tried to move on, but now, here was proof, a scrap of his daughter's life, a link to something he thought was lost forever. His hands shook, the wallet slipping from his grasp. The sound of Bola's soft whimper broke through the haze of confusion. The dog nudged the photographs with his nose, as though urging Ravi to understand. Suddenly, Ravi knew. Bola hadn't just been gone. He had been searching. For him. For her. Tears welled up in Ravi's eyes as he looked at the dog. The world, with all its cruelty, had given him one last gift, a thread of hope, fragile but undeniable. Ravi sat in stunned silence, the photographs still in his shaking hands. His mind spun with impossible thoughts. This couldn't be real. He'd seen his daughter die. The crash had been brutal. There were no survivors, only the mangled wreckage and the sobbing, confused authorities who had handed him the ashes of his wife and daughter, their bodies unrecognizable. How could it be? How? Could Mira still be alive? His heart pounded in his chest as he looked down at the photo again. Mira, his daughter. Her bright, curious eyes stared back at him. This image, this moment frozen in time, had been taken just before the accident. How could she have survived? How could she have lived all these years without him knowing? And what of the wallet, the other photographs, and the scrap of paper that had slipped from inside it? Ravi hadn't noticed it at first, but now he held it in his hand. The ink was smeared, but the address was still legible enough to make out a part of it, an unfamiliar neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, far from the life he knew. His breath caught in his throat. His mind was racing now, trying to put the pieces together. But how could he? He needed answers. And he needed them now. "Pola," Ravi whispered hoarsely, looking down at the dog who was sitting beside him, tail tucked low. The dog's eyes, though weary and tired, held an unmistakable intelligence, as though it understood the weight of this discovery. "You've brought me back to her, haven't you?" With a soft bark, Bola nudged his hand, then turned, as if to say, "Come, follow me." The silence between them grew heavy with unspoken understanding. Ravi couldn't explain it, but something in his heart told him this was the path to the truth. The dog had brought him this far. It had been the bridge between loss and reunion. Without another thought, Ravi stood up, slipping the photographs and the wallet into his jacket pocket. He had to go. There was no more time for doubt, for hesitation. His daughter was alive, somewhere, and he wasn't going to waste another second. Ravi followed Bola, who led him through the crowded streets, his movements slow but determined, as if he knew exactly where to go. Ravi's mind churned with questions, his thoughts a whirlwind. How had she survived? Who had taken care of her? What had happened to her in the years since the crash? The thought that his daughter had lived, been out there, waiting for him to find her, almost seemed too much to bear. As they reached the outer edge of the city, the familiar skyline began to fade, replaced by older, more dilapidated buildings. Ravi had never ventured into this part of town, and the deepening shadows added a sense of unease. Bola, however, remained resolute, trotting ahead as though he had done this many times before. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Bola stopped in front of an old, crumbling building. A sign that read, "Shelter for Lost Souls," hung crookedly above the entrance, barely legible in the dim light. Ravi's heart lurched. This was it. This was where Bola had brought him. With a deep breath, Ravi stepped inside. The musty air filled his lungs, and the creaky floors groaned underfoot as he made his way through the hall. Bola led him past a row of beds, some empty, others occupied by people who looked worn and weary, their faces etched with stories of hardship. At the end of the hallway, the dog paused before a door. Ravi's chest tightened as he approached. His hands trembled, but he reached for the doorknob, pushing it open. Inside the room lay a figure on a small bed, surrounded by blankets, her face pale, her body frail. A nurse stood nearby, her expression sympathetic. She turned when Ravi entered, her face softening. "She was found unconscious weeks ago," the nurse explained gently. "No identification, just a few belongings, a bag, a photo of a child. Nothing more. We've been trying to get her well. Again!" Ravi stepped closer, his heart hammering. There on the bed, with her eyes closed in exhaustion, was a woman so thin, so fragile, but there was no mistaking the resemblance. Her face, her eyes. It was her, Mira. A faint smile tugged at her lips as she stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. "Papa?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, yet unmistakable. Ravi's breath caught in his throat, the years of grief and longing crashing over him in an overwhelming wave. He didn't know how to respond. His heart was full, and yet it ached in ways he had never known. "Mira," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion, his hands trembling as he reached for her. And in that moment, it didn't matter that the world had been cruel, that so much time had passed. He was holding her again. His daughter. Alive. The truth, buried for so long, had finally come to light. And now, it was time to heal. The days that followed were a blur for Ravi. His mind struggled to process everything, the shock of finding Mira alive, the overwhelming joy mingled with disbelief, the quiet relief that settled over him like a soft blanket. She was so frail, so fragile after everything she'd endured. Yet there was something unbreakable in her eyes, a spark of resilience that reminded him so much of his wife. He stayed by her side, never leaving the small room in the shelter. The nurses had warned him that Mira's recovery would be slow, that her body had been worn down by years of neglect and illness, but Ravi didn't care. He held her hand constantly, whispered to her when she slept, and watched over her as if guarding something precious, because to him she always had been. Mira, though weak and slow to speak, showed glimmers of the girl he had lost. There were moments when she would smile faintly, as if recalling the times they had shared. And there were the quiet moments, too, when her eyes would cloud over with confusion or sorrow, as if she were still trying to piece together the scattered fragments of her memory. One evening, after a particularly long day of nursing her back to health, Ravi sat at her bedside, his hand resting on hers. The room was dimly lit, the only sound the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Bola lay curled up at their feet, his breathing steady, his presence a constant comfort. Ravi smiled at the dog who had not once left their side. Bola had been a silent witness to all the pain and healing, a loyal companion who seemed to understand the depth of the journey they had all been on. Mira stirred in her sleep, a soft groan escaping her lips. Ravi leaned in, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "Mira," he whispered, the word tasting like a miracle. "You're going to be okay. I'm here. I won't let you go." Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she just looked at him, as though searching his face for something she couldn't name. Then, as if something had clicked in her tired mind, she weakly squeezed his hand. "Papa, I remember bits and pieces." Ravi felt his throat tighten. "You don't have to remember everything right away," he said softly, his voice full of tenderness. We'll take it one day at a time. I'm here for you, always. For the next few weeks, the healing process was slow but steady. Mira regained her strength bit by bit. Ravi never left her side, except for short trips to gather food and necessities. Bola stayed close, as always, watching over both of them with his unwavering loyalty. And then, one morning, as Ravi sat by her bedside, he noticed that Mira had grown quieter than usual. Her breathing, though still labored, had a certain stillness to it that made him uneasy. "Mira?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "Are you feeling okay?" She blinked slowly, her eyes clouded, as if caught in some far-off thought. "Papa, I'm so tired," she whispered, her voice thin. "I feel like I've been running for so long, and now I just want to rest." Ravi's heart skipped a beat. He had never seen her look so fragile, so vulnerable. It was as though, after all the years of fighting to survive, Mira was finally letting go. "Mira, no," Ravi whispered urgently, leaning in closer. "You can't give up. Not now. We're so close." But Mira smiled faintly, her gaze softening as she looked at him. "Papa, I'm not giving up," she murmured. "I just want you to know I'm okay now. You found me. That's all. I needed. You gave me a reason to believe again." Tears welled in Ravi's eyes as he held her hand tighter. "You're not alone anymore," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm here, and I will always be here." But Mira's eyes fluttered and she sighed, the smallest of breaths escaping her lips. And then, as if she had waited for this moment, she closed her eyes, her body relaxing into the bed, her grip loosening ever so slightly in Ravi's hand. For a brief moment, the room was still. The world held its breath. Then, with a final, quiet sigh, Mira was gone. Ravi's world shattered in that instant. His heart broke, a jagged crack splitting it open, but he knew, deep within, that Mira had found peace. She had come back to him, and in that fleeting, beautiful moment, she had given him the final gift, the gift of closure. He had found her, and she had found him. They had been reunited, even if only for a short time. And Bola, as if understanding the weight of the moment, nudged Ravi gently with his nose, offering the kind of quiet support only a dog could give. Ravi stroked the dog's head, his tears mingling with the warmth of the animal's fur. "We've both lost so much," he whispered, his voice filled with grief. "But she's with your spirit now, Bola, and I know she's at peace." Bola, exhausted by the long journey, curled up at their feet, and Ravi allowed himself to rest beside his daughter one last time. In that moment, the three of them, the man, the dog, and the girl, had come full circle. They had found each other again, and now, finally, they could rest.